The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of a modest house on Cedar Road, casting soft patterns on the hardwood floor of a small living room in the quiet town of Oak Ridge. The air smelled faintly of chamomile tea and old books, a comforting scent that had filled the home for decades. Henry Grayson, a 78-year-old widower, sat in his favorite armchair, a faded green relic from the 70s, sipping his morning tea while the radio played a crackly rendition of a Frank Sinatra song. At his feet, curled into a perfect circle on a knitted blanket, was Misty, his gray tabby cat with a white patch over one eye that made her look perpetually curious. Her fur was soft and slightly ruffled from sleep, her emerald eyes half closed as she basked in the warmth of the morning light. Henry reached down to scratch behind her ears, his movements slow but deliberate, and Misty purred softly, her tail flicking once in contentment. This was their routine, a ritual of quiet companionship that had sustained Henry through the lonely years since his wife, Margaret, passed away a decade ago. Misty had been Margaret's cat, a tiny kitten they'd found shivering in a cardboard box outside the library one rainy afternoon. When Margaret died, Misty became Henry's anchor, a small, warm presence that kept the silence from becoming unbearable. Henry set his teacup on the side table, the porcelain clinking softly against the saucer, and leaned back in his chair. He'd been feeling off since he woke up, a tightness in his chest, a faint dizziness that came and went, but he chalked it up to age and the damp spring weather. He was a sturdy man, or at least he had been, with a life spent tending to his garden and fixing things around town as Oak Ridge's unofficial handyman. But time had a way of creeping up, and lately his knees ached more, his breaths felt shorter. Still, he didn't dwell on it. He had Misty to feed, the begonias to water, and a crossword puzzle waiting in the morning paper. There was comfort in the ordinary, and Henry clung to it like a lifeline. Misty stretched, her paws extending forward, and hopped down from the blanket, padding over to her water bowl in the kitchen. Henry watched her go, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She was a creature of habit, just like him. Every morning she'd drink, then sit by the back door, waiting for him to let her out to chase the sparrows in the yard. But this morning, as Henry stood to follow her, a sharp pain sliced through his chest, sudden and searing, like a hot knife twisting between his ribs. His vision blurred, the edges darkening, and he stumbled, his hand grasping for the armrest but finding only air. He collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud, his teacup tumbling from the table and shattering into jagged pieces on the hardwood. His breaths came in shallow gasps, each one a struggle, as the pain radiated down his left arm. He tried to call out, but his voice was a weak rasp, swallowed by the quiet hum of the radio. Misty froze mid-step, her ears swiveling toward the sound of the crash. She turned, her eyes wide and alert, and darted back into the living room. Henry lay on his side, his face pale, his lips tinged with a faint blue. His hand twitched toward the shattered cup, as if reaching for something to ground him, but he couldn't move further. Misty approached cautiously, her tail low, her whiskers quivering as she sniffed the air. She nudged his hand with her nose, her cold, wet touch a stark contrast to the clammy warmth of his skin. Henry didn't respond, didn't pat her head or murmur her name like he always did. His eyes were half open, unfocused, staring at the ceiling as his chest rose and fell in uneven, labored breaths. Misty's instincts kicked in, a primal awareness that something was terribly wrong. Cats are sensitive creatures, attuned to the subtlest shifts in their environment, and Misty had spent years by Henry's side, learning his rhythms, the way he shuffled his feet in the morning, the cadence of his voice when he hummed, the steady beat of his heart when she curled against him at night. This stillness, this silence, was not right. She meowed, a sharp, insistent sound, and nudged him again, harder this time, pressing her head against his cheek. Henry's fingers twitched, but he couldn't lift his hand to comfort her. His lips moved, forming a faint "Misty," but the word was barely a whisper, lost in the static of the radio. The cat's unease grew, her fur bristling along her spine. She paced around Henry, her tail flicking rapidly, her meows growing louder, more urgent. She darted to the back door, scratching at the wood, hoping to get out, to find someone. But the door was locked, as it always was when Henry was home. Misty ran back to Henry, her claws clicking on the floor, and circled him again, her cries now a high-pitched wail that echoed through the small house. She knew she couldn't help him alone, but her feline mind grasped at the only thing she could do: make noise, make someone notice. She leapt onto the windowsill overlooking the front yard, her body tense, and began to yowl, a piercing, desperate sound that cut through the quiet morning. She clawed at the glass, her paws thumping against it rhythmically, her green eyes scanning the empty street for any sign of movement. Across the street, Lisa Bennett was in her kitchen, pouring a second cup of coffee before heading to her shift at the local grocery store. She was a single mother in her early 40s, with a teenage son who was still asleep upstairs, and she'd lived on Cedar Road for years, often waving to Henry as he tended his garden. Lisa heard the faint, persistent yowling over the hum of her dishwasher and frowned, setting her mug down. She knew Misty's voice. Henry's cat wasn't the type to make a fuss unless something was off. Lisa stepped onto her porch, pulling her cardigan tighter against the morning chill, and squinted across the street. Misty was at the window, her small body pressed against the glass, her cries sharp and unrelenting. Lisa's stomach tightened. She'd read stories about animals sensing danger, dogs barking before earthquakes, cats alerting their owners to fires. Something about Misty's behavior felt wrong, urgent. Lisa crossed the street quickly, her sneakers splashing through small puddles left by the overnight rain. She climbed the steps to Henry's porch and knocked on the door, her knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. "Henry, you okay in there?" she called, her voice loud but steady. There was no answer, only Misty's continued yowling from the window. Lisa peered through the glass beside the door, cupping her hands around her face to block the glare. She saw Henry on the floor, his body crumpled near the armchair, the shattered teacup scattered around him. Her heart lurched. She tried the door. It was unlocked, a small-town habit Henry had never broken, and pushed it open, rushing inside. "Henry!" she shouted, dropping to her knees beside him. His face was ashen, his breathing shallow, but he was still alive, his eyes fluttering as he registered her presence. Misty jumped down from the windowsill and stood nearby, her tail low, her meows softening into a low, anxious hum. Lisa pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed 911, her voice trembling but clear as she gave the operator the address. "It's my neighbor, Henry Grayson. I think he's having a heart attack. He's on the floor, barely breathing. Please, hurry." The operator instructed her to stay on the line and asked if Henry was conscious. Lisa touched his hand. It was cold, clammy, and saw his lips move, a faint groan escaping. "He's trying to respond, but he's not really talking," she said, her eyes darting to Misty, who was now sitting a few feet away, watching intently. While waiting for the ambulance, Lisa grabbed a throw blanket from the couch and draped it over Henry, trying to keep him warm. She spoke to him softly, her voice a steady stream of reassurance. "Help's coming, Henry. Just hold on. You're going to be okay." Misty crept closer, her body low to the ground, and nudged Henry's hand again, as if to echo Lisa's words. The cat's presence was a small comfort in the chaos, a reminder of the bond that had spurred her to act. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, its siren cutting through the morning stillness of Oak Ridge. Paramedics rushed in, their movement swift and practiced as they assessed Henry's condition. "Pulse is weak, BP's dropping," one of them said, fitting an oxygen mask over Henry's face. They lifted him onto a stretcher, working quickly to stabilize him as they wheeled him out to the ambulance. Lisa followed them to the porch, her hands shaking as she watched them load Henry into the vehicle. One of the paramedics, a young woman with a kind face, turned to her. "You did good calling us so fast. Timing's everything with these things." Lisa nodded, her throat tight, and glanced back at Misty, who was now sitting in the doorway, her green eyes fixed on the ambulance as it pulled away. The paramedic noticed the cat and gave a small smile. "Looks like she knew something was up. Smart little thing." Lisa managed a weak laugh. "Yeah, she's Henry's guardian angel." With the ambulance gone, Lisa realized she couldn't leave Misty alone. She stepped back into the house, her eyes scanning the room for the cat's essentials. She found a small carrier in the hall closet, along with a bag of kibble and a water bowl. Misty didn't resist as Lisa gently coaxed her into the carrier, her movements calm now that the immediate danger had passed. "You're coming with me, sweetheart," Lisa said, securing the latch. "We'll figure this out." She took Misty across the street to her own house, setting the carrier in her living room and letting the cat out. Misty explored the new space slowly, her tail low, her ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. Lisa's son, Ethan, came downstairs rubbing sleep from his eyes and stopped short when he saw the cat. "Who's this?" he asked, crouching to get a better look. "Henry's cat, Misty," Lisa said, her voice heavy. "Henry had a heart attack this morning. She was yowling at the window. Got my attention. I think she saved his life." Ethan's eyes widened and he reached out a hand. Misty sniffed it, then let him scratch her chin, her purr a soft rumble in the quiet room. Over the next few hours, Lisa called the hospital for updates. Henry had been rushed into emergency surgery, a stent to clear a blocked artery, but he was stable, the doctors cautiously optimistic. Lisa felt a wave of relief, but also a new responsibility. She knew Henry had no family nearby. His only daughter lived across the country and wouldn't be able to get to Oak Ridge for a few days. Until then, Misty needed a place to stay, and Lisa's house became her temporary home. Misty adjusted quickly, her routines shifting to fit the new environment. She'd sit by the window, watching the street as if waiting for Henry to come back, but she also seemed to understand that Lisa and Ethan were there to help. Ethan, who'd always wanted a pet but couldn't have one due to allergies, took to Misty immediately, sneaking her bits of chicken from his dinner and building her a small fort out of couch cushions. Lisa watched the bond grow, her heart warming at the sight of her son's gentle care. She called the vet to make sure Misty was up to date on her shots and bought a few toys, a feather wand, a crinkly ball, that Misty batted around with quiet enthusiasm. A week later, Henry was released from the hospital. Weaker but alive, his color returning with each passing day. Lisa drove him home, Misty in her carrier on the back seat, meowing softly as if sensing the reunion. When they reached the house on Cedar Road, Henry's eyes lit up at the sight of his cat. He sat in his armchair, Misty leaping into his lap the moment Lisa opened the carrier. The cat pressed her head against Henry's chest, her purrs loud and steady, as if checking that his heart was beating properly now. Henry's hands trembled as he stroked her fur, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a good girl, Misty," he said. "My good girl." Lisa stood in the doorway, smiling through tears. "She knew something was wrong, Henry. She wouldn't stop yowling until I came over." Henry nodded, his eyes glistening. "Margaret always said she was special. I didn't know how much until now." That evening, Lisa stayed for tea. The three of them, Henry, Misty, and her, sharing the quiet warmth of the little house. Henry told her about the first time he and Margaret had found Misty, how the kitten had chosen them as much as they'd chosen her. Lisa listened, her heart full, and when she finally left, she felt a new connection to her neighbor, a bond forged through the small brave cat who'd refused to let silence win. Misty curled up at Henry's feet, her eyes half closed, her purr a steady hum that filled the room. The morning sun rose over Oak Ridge, and for the first time in a long while, Henry didn't feel alone. Misty had made sure of that.